Welcome to this Minara Chamber of Commerce webinar. Fortunately, I've got load shedding here, so I might be in and out of signal, so you may not hear me sometimes. Signal in this area is terrible when there's load shedding. Well, thank you to Russell Curtis, who's agreed to come and present to us today. Russell, I think the timing of this webinar isn't so great with load shedding. So I think the participants we've got are quite limited, but we are recording and posting to YouTube, our YouTube channel and Facebook and stuff like that. So I think we'll get quite a lot of views. Amina's gotten quite a few apologies already. So I think we can go on even with the limited number of people that we have here. Are you comfortable with that, Russell?
Yeah, absolutely. No problems. Happy to do so.
Okay. Just a little bit about Russell. Russell has run the Durban Investment Promotion Authority, known as Invest Durban, for 18 years now. He's holding quite a few non-executive directorships, including the Durban Chamber of Commerce, Durban Auto Cluster, and is the past chairman of the Institute of Directors. He's also been on the Mercury editorial board of independent newspapers, and he's sat on the UN Investment Advisory Council in 2008 and 2016. Russell's also served on the MCI World Bank Expert Advisory Group on City Investment Promotion and jointly authored publications. He has been a UN World Investment Forum panelist. He holds a degree of Chartered Associate Institute of Bankers and a postgraduate diploma in business administration from the University of Wales and an MBA from the London School of Economics. Yeah, that's quite a CV there, Russell. Yeah, we're so glad to have you on today. Can I hand over to you to present to us on why it is we should be staying in South Africa? I think we've got a lot of people considering their options overseas, and there's just talk about people wanting to leave and why you should leave, and there's not much being said about why we should stay here. What is there to stay here for? What future is there for our kids? I keep getting asked that all the time. Why should I be here? What's it going to be like for my kids in the future? So maybe you can give us some good news, hopefully.
Absolutely, Zain, and greetings to everyone. Thank you very much for having me on board. And yes, I hope over the next half an hour, I'll give you some antidotes to the negative newspaper headlines, because I personally am a glass half full person, and I think we mustn't kid ourselves. Africa has never been easy, and so why should it be much different now? And yet, over whether you want to say the last couple of generations, or whether you want to say over the last few hundred years, many people have made significant stakes for themselves and their families here going forward. So Zain, with that, I'm going to hopefully trust technology to work and get the slide share going. I hope it's going to cooperate with me. So there we go. All right. So Zain, if you can just give me a thumbs up that you can see my slides on your screen.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So the topic is as described. It's a bit of a cheeky one. After ... and you can fill in the blanks. What's left? So whether that's after the July nonsense, what's left now? After COVID, what's left now? Or you fill in the blanks, what's left? I hope to answer some of those questions as we go through. Just some quick takeaways, and Zain, I will send this PowerPoint presentation through to yourselves as administrators, and I don't mind if you post it along with the video clip or post it more widely, because there is a lot of information on here. In the interest of time, it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose for some of your viewers. So some quick key overviews. Yes, the foreign direct investment FDI performance declining in 2021, but it's significantly improved on last year's horrific year. Significant commitments still coming through from the private sector. So 110 billion rands in new commitments in that November 2020 SA investment conference that the president held in November last year. And that's bringing the cumulative total of these last 3 years to nearly 800 billion rands worth of private sector commitments. On top of that, or underpinning that, depending on your view, public sector expenditure on infrastructure increasing by 29%. And that's going to be a key underpin of opportunities. Significant plans around further enabling the infrastructure, whether that's through Eskom, Durban port partnerships, et cetera. And we must continue to get perspective about our major metropolitan cities. We continue to be continental centers of excellence, in spite of everything that has happened. And the last bullet point there is a key takeaway for everyone, and that is public-private partnerships and many other forms of closer collaboration are going to be the path for us going forward. So whilst I know this is something of a national audience, possibly, I can't resist the opportunity to just remind some of our Durbanites and KwaZulu-Natal family members where we sit. So the city of Durban, it's about 100 kilometers of coastline, 2,500 square kilometers is that yellow part of the metropolitan region of Durban, 4 million people, and about 2/3 of our provincial output is in fact coming from that little golden goose in the middle there. But we sit within juxtaposed the other major metros, and they too are absolute powerhouses. I think it's no secret that Gauteng and Johannesburg, richest city in Africa, best city for climate change finance, best international mixed-use developments, and a number of UN awards through that Gauteng area. Cape Town, likewise, listed as one of the top 10 global sustainability cities, one of the smartest cities on the African continent, significant investments in Cape Town, and they're certainly taking the green agenda quite strongly down there. But so is the city of Durban. Make no mistake, we mustn't think that the grass is always greener, whether it's in Cape Town or whether that's in capitals around the world. The city of Durban, okay, that first one is a little bit of an old one now, a 2016 stat. Knight Frank do a global residential cities index, and it's pure dollar-based ROI. In 2016, Durban was #1 in South Africa, #1 in Africa, and sitting at position 26 in the top 50 cities on the planet for return on investment in dollars. Okay, 2016, but we haven't drifted that far off. TomTom traffic index, the least congested metro in South Africa, that keeps the wheels of commerce moving. That helps mom and dad on the school runs. Our global business process outsourcing or contact center. South Africa, top country for the last 5 years for contact centers, and Durban best in many of those categories. British Airways listed us as the city of Durban, must-see destination, #1 on British Airways' own ranking at the end of 2019, and a number of other awards for our city. So it's quite important, Zane and colleagues, that we keep perspective in spite of the nonsense that we've had, in spite of. What's happening in Durban right now? A number of flagship projects. This is just an excerpt of those. It's what we call our catalytic projects. There are in excess of 30 pure private sector driven catalytic projects with an investment value exceeding 200 billion rand going on across our city. Have the potential to have significant boost as they roll out. And if we now start to zoom out from the city of Durban, and that's what I'll start to do a lot more of for the balance of the presentation, because it's not just all about Durban. We have a number of good news headlines for our nation. The commodity boom with significant agricultural output and good growth in minerals and metals. Our tax revenue has increased significantly, and that empowers, whilst we don't like to pay tax, it certainly empowers increasing and improved government spending on the key infrastructure elements. National JSE listed companies, RCL Foods, Checkers, making significant progress in spite of what's been happening these last 18 months, or even if you want to say the last 3-4 months. Renewable energy, it's a huge growth area, as is tech and innovation. And we can be quite happy that South Africa has recorded a primary budget surplus, the first time in 3 years. In other words, recording more revenue than expenditure in our national accounts. And the Rand has been the best performing emerging market currency on the planet for the whole of 2021. But as we all know, July was an absolute shocker. The rule of law was really thrown up in the air during that month. But again, Zain and colleagues, I'm trying to introduce some perspective on where we sit, not only in a nation, but in a continent and around the world. If you have a look at what's called the Rule of Law Index, the 2020, again, I concede we're not right up at the top, but out of 128 countries, we're still in the top half, 45 out of 128 countries. And if you look at the sub-Saharan regional ranking, out of 31 countries in sub-Saharan, we were still sitting at position number 5. So safety and security, key challenge, absolute problem, but I can guarantee you we are not the worst in Africa, and we are certainly not the worst in the rest of the world. A number of other indices on, let's call it brand South Africa. Where do we sit in this globe? Yes, there are places better than us. Are we the worst? Absolutely not, by a living mile. I'll start off just on the left-hand side there. Climate Scope Outlook, significant investment in renewables. This is a 2018 index across 101 developing countries. South Africa had the 3rd highest level of finance for new clean energy projects. And then if we just cast our eyes down all of these other indices, the 2020 Open Budget Index, South Africa, number 1 out of 115 countries. Look, the World Economic Forum Global Competitive Index has been suspended globally over this last year for a whole host of reasons. But the Press Freedom Index, 32. The Mo Ibrahim Index for African Governance, number 6 out of 54 African countries. And you can see some of the rest of the rankings going down there. Brand Finance, Soft Power Index, the Bloom Consulting Country Brands. We sit at country number 36 out of 194 different countries, good country indices and others. I'll zoom in very quickly just on that Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance. So we're sitting at number 6 of 54 countries on the continent, and we score in the top 10 in all 4 categories on economic opportunity. And believe it or not, even the safety and rule of law, despite what happened in July, shocking as it was, participation and human rights and human development. Again, fully conceding we're not the best, but I guarantee you there are reasons to stay because we are nowhere near the worst. I mentioned earlier in the opening slide, yes, FDI, foreign direct investment, declining due to COVID and a number of other issues. But there's been some improvements over the losses or the reduction in foreign direct investment over 2020 coming into 21. That is replicated nationally. So if you look at foreign direct investment in real investment values into South Africa, 2020 was a shocker. 2021 hasn't been great. But we need not concern ourselves that much because whilst the annual FDI has been declining largely due to COVID, it is a relatively small component of our total investments and the performance of our domestic investments. So these are our brothers and sisters, whether it's in JSE listed companies or others, is a much more significant contributor to the South African economy. And these are the announcements that pure private sector leaders made in the November 2020 South African Investment Conference, whether that was in advanced manufacturing. And you can see the company names there, 6 billion, agro processing, 1.5, manufacturing, 9 billion, oil and gas, 1.3. Again, pure private sector commitments made in November 2020. And we must bear in mind, these are not wish list projects. These are not pie in the sky announcements. These are announcements that are made after the board has approved them of the private sector company, after they've raised the financing, and they're either significantly in progress or they are about to start. Metals fabrication, 2 billion. Private financial institutions, nearly 11 billion. ICT, as you heard me say earlier, a big, big one. Nearly 17 billion rands worth of private sector projects announced in November 2020. Minerals beneficiation and others. So cumulatively, that was 51 projects. If you look at the yellow band at the top, 51 projects, 13 sectors across the 9 provinces. And these are the last ones in category terms of tourism and leisure, green economy, and development finance. So over these last 3 years of the South Africa Investment Conference announcements, nearly 800 billion worth of private sector investments already underway across our city and province. This now is a view of the building plans. And yes, again, we can see the destructive effects of COVID in 2020. But I'm happy to say, if you just extrapolate the numbers for 2021, we will outpace 2020 in terms of building plan approvals. So these are building plans across South Africa, nearly 12 billion of building plan approvals in 2020, and we should surpass that for 2021. And as I said, whilst some of the numbers or the trends don't look so great, we can take comfort that the increasing investments by private sector and increasing investments in public sector infrastructure lead will bring opportunities for viewers. So the government is ramping up over this period, A, because we've got the money, B, because we have the plan, and C, because you'll see in the number of announcements lately in the press, a much stronger public-private partnership focus to help deliver on the government infrastructure spending. This is what National Treasury has approved already in terms of the budget framework of expenditure for pure public sector infrastructure, going up to about 159 billion rand in budgeted National Treasury supported public sector infrastructure. But it doesn't just stop there. There's a lot more on the go in terms of a national infrastructure plan. That national infrastructure plan, very ambitious goals, but they're focusing on key areas such as energy, restructuring Eskom, enabling an increase to the self-generation from the small 1 megawatts up to 100 megawatts. And I hope some of the viewers watching have seen these headlines reflected in the media. Increasing the ramp up of renewable energy up to 10,000 megawatts in renewable IPPs over the course of the next 18 months. Freight, rail, and transport. I hope most viewers have seen the calls for increasing public-private partnerships. Transnet releasing requests for expressions of interest for upwards of 100 billion rands worth of partnership investment just in the Durban port alone. And then private sector acceleration of dry ports, whether that be in Cato Ridge or the linkages up to Tambo Springs. Other key areas of that national infrastructure plan: water, absolutely essential. You'll see a renewed agency authority to manage our water resources, and those WULAs, the water use licensing, getting prioritized for approvals a lot faster in this PPP space that we have shifted into. Climate change is always going to be a key priority. Digital communications, the internet connection through to the public sector buildings and structures to be increased to upwards of 80%, and digitization of that service delivery being identified as one of the top 3 priority areas where a lot more public-private partnerships are being sought to bring the digital communications in. So that plan is resulting in some absolutely astronomical numbers. So these were the ones that were announced at the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium in June 2020. I'll say again, the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium in June 2020. Zane, I'd like to encourage viewers to access that website that's listed in the yellow banner at the top, sidsa.org.za/program. These were the ones that were seen as the first grasp at a pipeline in June 2020. What they've been doing in partnership with all the commercial banks, in partnership with all of the DFIs, in partnership with international organizations like the World Bank, is from June 2020 until this year's SIDSA, which happened on the 7th of October. And that's why I encourage everyone to have a look at that website there. Go to the program drop-down box and have a look at the program of the symposium that happened last week on 7th of October. They've spent a year rifling down these 276 projects to the first 130 that are going to be fast-tracked through the channel. And those 130 are in excess of R1 trillion worth of public sector infrastructure spend. Of those 130 projects, more than 50 of them have already been approved by the banks. More than 50 of them have already been approved by the banks and are representing something like 350 billion rands worth of projects financed and on the go right now in South Africa. So a lot of numbers and a lot of plans, and I can hear my own skeptic inside me, if not skeptics in the audience now, saying plans, 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 plans. We've heard it all before. Well, let's look at some business confidence indices and see what do our peers think. This is the KPMG South Africa and Business Leadership South Africa 2021 CEO Outlook. It was just released this week. What KPMG does is they replicate the survey in South Africa, and then they juxtapose CEOs' responses in relation to their global CEO survey. So before we get too carried away with our own internal skeptic, let's see what chief execs globally and domestically are saying. The results speak for themselves. There's an increasing optimism and confidence in both the global economy and the local economy return to levels not seen since the start of the pandemic. 82% of CEOs are confident about the growth prospects over the next 3 years. 90% of local bosses optimistic in terms of the prospects for their own companies, compared to 87% of chief execs internationally. So again, I'm talking about perspective. We don't have the most rosy platform. I fully concede that. Do we have everything that we need? No, we don't. But are we the absolute dogs of Africa? No. Is it so much rosier and greener everywhere else? Well, look at the CEO surveys. 90% of local CEOs optimistic about their own company, compared to 87% in the international survey. Yes, growth rate's still too low, 2% in 2022. And so a lot of CEOs through this survey looking to invest in expansion and business transformation, and a number of them doing that through inorganic methods, such as JVs, mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliances, and many others. And that is going to be achieved with what they're calling aggressive growth methods. So 88% stating that they're going after aggressive growth, and that's closely aligned to the global average of CEOs at 87%. So are we in the doldrums? No, we're not. Do we have opportunity? Yes, we are. Is everyone else doing so much better than us? No, they're not. So these are the results juxtaposed against each other, and I apologize for the viewers. It's a bit of a noisy slide, if I can call it that. But it juxtaposes the CEOs, the South African CEOs' viewpoints against the global CEOs, whether that's growth prospects, organic growth, inorganic growth, digitization, driving financial performance, ESG investments, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see for yourself, the numbers are not that dramatically different between South African CEOs and the global CEOs. And that's in spite of our tough environment. And yet we are still keeping pace with what global CEOs think for their companies vis-a-vis our companies here in South Africa, Durban, Joburg, Cape Town, and beyond. So I'm coming into land now, Zane, and again, an unashamed plug for the city of Durban, because that's what you can see behind me right now. Durban has many beautiful assets, whether that's our Moses Mabhida Stadium, which has been rated as one of the best on the planet, through to Durban Country Club right across the road, which turns 100 years old next year, 2022 at the Durban Country Club. And yet, in spite of her being 100 years old, she still sits in the top 100 golf courses on the planet. So, if nothing else is remembered, Zane, I'd like to empower your listeners to speak with structure and confidence about South Africa. And we're giving you here an acronym to speak with structure and confidence about the city of Durban. We are one of the most award-winning municipalities on the continent. Our niche is we have a unique lifestyle of business and pleasure together in one place. We sit within one of the largest human resource pools with some of the fastest skills development taking place. The University of KZN is the second largest direct contact university on the entire African continent. We sit with some of the higher economic growth rates. Is it high enough? No, it's not. But we are higher than the national average, And we have a unique benefit as being a coastal metropolitan port city. That coastal metropolitan port cities are outpacing national growth rates in all major cities around the world. Infrastructure leadership, we sit with a tourism crown. Sure, Cape Town may beat us on international tourism, Kruger Park may beat us on international tourism, but we have the largest number of domestic tourists coming to our region with significant asset growth available once we can all get past this COVID nightmare. And sure, we may be a secondary city, but I'd like to say we're still a substantial and very sustainable city with a good spread across primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. And so I'd encourage all viewers to speak with structure and confidence about our country, and speak with structure and confidence about the city of Durban. And it's through seeing through our glass being half full that we can find these partnerships, construct these partnerships, and build the future that we do want to see for our children and grandchildren. I'll stop there, Zane, and I'm happy to take any questions that may come through. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. That was some informative information there. Yeah. I've had this thought in my mind, or question in my mind rather. A couple of weeks ago, there was this video posted on social media by I can't remember who it was, but an international speaker talking about expropriation without compensation, and the only country in the world that's expected to be doing this. And it was so negative, and I received this from international friends, people in other countries around the world, and it was quite a shocker to see that. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, Zane, I'm not going to try and defend a party line. I can quite confidently quote the Chief Justice, the current outgoing Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, Mogoeng. He was adamant all the way through that whole process that there was no need to change the Constitution and that this was a bad idea. So I'm of that same view as well. It was an unnecessary amendment to the Constitution. And the mechanisms to try and redress imbalances of the past were always there in the rule of law. And government's performance in that area, whether it was on land claims and many others, actually needed to be the focal point to improve the pace and process of land claims, and improve the pace and process, for example, on small-scale commercial farmer support. So I'm in agreement that it's an absolute negative for investment. And so the only caveat I can add to that, to try and again inject some balance and some perspective, because if we get too emotional about these things, we'll end up just sticking our head in the sand, or we'll just end up packing our bags and running away to somewhere else, which could in fact be worse. And so the only added perspective I can add to it is that the government's policy in terms of applying expropriation without compensation says, and I've been in the room with Ibrahim Patel when he's confirmed this. Number one, any property that was legally acquired through an arm's length commercial transaction in the post-democratic South Africa, i.e. from 94 onwards, is not on the target for assault in any way, shape, or form. Number two, residential property, privately owned, most of it acquired post-94, is not on the target for EWC without compensation. Number three, private agricultural commercial land that is viable, that's being worked, that's being produced, that's being done in partnership with workers on the ground, that's not being targeted to then assault our food security. And the acceleration will be a lot more on some of the public sector owned land. So there are a number of nuances which never really make good headlines because, you know, newspapers are like shock and horror. which we just need to take these things on board whilst trying to manage and digest an admittedly negative set of laws around EWOC.
Yeah, thank you. As I recall seeing a survey or some sorts on social media. I've never verified it, but I recall seeing it saying that Durban, Pietermaritzburg, and Johannesburg were in the top 10 most dangerous cities to live in. I don't know how true that is. Any comments on that?
Yeah, look, I'll just say on behalf of Durban, there's anecdotal evidence that our crime rates are lower than elsewhere. I am intentionally not wanting to get into what you might call comparative advertising or destructive comparisons of one center in South Africa to another. Do we have crime levels that are too high? Absolutely. And so I'd rather talk about the future. I can't change the stats of yesterday. I can't change the performance of the last year. But what I can tell you is, given what happened in July, it was business leadership that saved the city and province and protected the presidency. It was faith-based leadership that saved the city, province, and protected the presidency. It was community-based leadership that protected the city and province and the presidency. And so I can tell you, let's not waste a good crisis. What's happened then is business leadership bodies, faith-based bodies, community bodies have been speaking to the president and presidency, the premier and provincial leaders, and the metro leadership, and have been saying, we've lost a lot, we still have a lot at risk, and so we want to work in a much closer partnership with you, putting our resources on the table with your resources to improve, in particular, on the safety and security issue. And I can give great confidence to all the audience members that this city and province will be the first metro in South Africa to have a written, documented, public-private partnership security plan done by the end of this month. There was a meeting with government leadership and business leadership on the 26th of August. It was a 4-hour meeting, only 2 issues on the agenda, safety and security being one. The resolution of that was we needed a PPP security plan. I'm part of the team that's helping to craft that. Business leadership are in their boots and all. Private sector security are in their boots and all. SAPs are in their boots and all, Metro Police and the provincial and metro governments. And that plan will move into implementation well before Christmas with significant funding from private sector and public sector. So I can't change the stats of yesterday. I can't change SAPS's performance of July. But what I can tell you is next year is going to be dramatically better on the safety and security front because we're in boots and all.
That's thanks. That's excellent news to hear. Hopefully we see some improvement and things get better in the future. One last thing from me was you mentioned 1 trillion, was it rands or dollars to be spent? Rands, okay, 1 trillion rands. The question comes about how much of that will actually be spent on the projects and how much of that will be siphoned. That's unfortunately the thinking of most of South Africans now. I mean, there's just been too much corruption. Yeah, so hopefully that changes. I don't know what you're gonna, what can you say about that, but yeah.
Unfortunately, previous leadership spent well over a decade entrenching a culture of graft, a culture of fraud and corruption. And so it's taking a lot of HTH to try and clean up our swimming pool. The Zondo Commission, thankfully, has been really pointing fingers, excuse me, into the eyes of all of those who were pillaging our country. And thankfully, we're starting to see some being brought to book. Yes, there's still levers of power that people who were starting to head towards incarceration are still grasping at those levers of power to try and have additional time. But I'm quite confident that the tide has turned. Again, I'm encouraging perspective. Is it all perfect? No. Are we in a terrible state? No. Are there better places than us? Sure. Is every place better than us? No. And so I would prefer to zoom out a little bit and get perspective and say 2-3 years ago, or even 7 years ago, we were heading to the cliff on fraud and corruption, which was going to bankrupt our country. Have we turned the tide away from the edge? I'd like to say I believe we have. I believe we have. We've started to turn that ship, but it's a massive super tanker and it's going to take some time to turn it. My last comment around the fraud and corruption is we get the government that we vote for. We get the government that we vote for. And so I'd like to encourage more and more South Africans to be quite a lot more robust, A, in how we vote, and B, in between voting periods, step confidently through your organized structures, organized business structures, faith-based structures, and community structures, through the doors of public sector and hold them accountable a lot more often in between the elections. That's my last comment.
This is very true. Thank you, Russell. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone want to ask anything? If not, I'd like to say thank you to Russell for joining us today and presenting this excellent session. I really think that was something I needed to hear, and I'm sure many of the listeners would need to hear it, because the fact of the matter is not all of us can afford to immigrate, to move to USA or Turkey or wherever we think the grass is greener. It's quite expensive, and not all of us have that kind of funds to purchase those investments, citizenships by investments. So we've got South Africa. We need to learn to live with it. We need to make it a better place to live in. So yeah, thanks for that words of optimism, Russell. Hopefully we get to hear a bit more of these kind of sessions. Appreciate your time. From Minara Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much. Thank you to the listeners, and cheers. We'll call the session ended.
Thanks very much, Zane. You'll have the presentation open to distribution. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, baby. So short.